embalming at its most sophisticated. The body of this elderly woman has been very carefully prepared, and you can tell that for a number of reasons. The hair is extremely well preserved. It would originally have been grey or white, but it's now been stained a reddish colour because of the resin which was applied to the entire surface of the body. The nose has retained its original shape, and this is an indication of the care of the embalmers. This is the incision which the embalmer made in the flank in order to extract the internal organs. The hands, and particularly the fingernails, are extremely well preserved, and this is another indication of the sophisticated techniques employed on embalming this particular lady. The fingernails have been held in position by winding very fine linen threads around each finger, and this is certainly not a feature of every mummy and is an indication of the careful methods employed by hair embalmers.
For the average Egyptian, it took 2 months' wages to be mummified and 2 months more to pay for the mask. But at any cost, the price was worth it. The Egyptians believed a person's spirit survived after death, but it needed nourishment. If the body was unrecognizable, the spirit would go hungry and its afterlife would be in jeopardy. A mummy was an insurance policy against oblivion. As early as 4000 BC, Egypt's dead were buried in shallow graves in the desert. The hot, dry sand naturally withdrew moisture, preventing the growth of bacteria and decay. Later, as burials became more elaborate, corpses were put in deep chambers. But without the dry heat of the desert sand, decomposition set in. To preserve the body, the Egyptians borrowed from nature and developed the art of mummification. In 1997, a team of archaeologists led by Renee Friedman of the University of California at Berkeley were exploring a cemetery at Hierakonpolis, the ancient capital of Upper Egypt, when they came across some graves that were relatively undisturbed. Though most had been plundered in antiquity, the remains were in remarkably good condition. One, an adult female aged 20 to 35, was still covered in matting and surrounded by 7 pots filled with food offerings. She died around 3500 BC, and her head, hands and arms had been wrapped in narrow strips of linen. Until now, the oldest known artificially preserved mummy dated back to 2950 BC. But the discovery of resin on the skin and linen of some of the bodies at Hierakonpolis suggests that the Egyptians were experimenting with the art of mummification some 500 years earlier than previously thought. In time, the technique would be perfected. At the Egyptian Museum in Cairo is the most extraordinary collection of mummies ever assembled in one room. Here lie 10 pharaohs from 3 dynasties spanning 500 years. As the rulers of Egypt, they received the best their embalmers had to give. Even in death, Thutmose IV looks like a king. His arms are carefully folded on his chest. His fingers are bent as if wrapped around a royal scepter. Seti I is over 3,000 years old. Despite a broken neck, his face still appears astonishingly lifelike and serene. It also retains the look of majesty befitting the powerful man he was. His son, Ramesses the Great, fathered 100 children and reigned for a lengthy 67 years, but his body reveals the torment of living with worn and abscessed teeth and a painful limp from arthritis of the hip. The body of Ramesses V is so well preserved, it even retains a rash of tiny sores attributed to smallpox, a deadly viral disease. The body of Egypt's most famous king, Tutankhamun, still lies in his tomb, sealed inside a gold coffin. Examination of his mummy in the 1970s revealed that his head isn't so well preserved, but X-rays of his skull have sparked a heated debate. Some Egyptologists claim he suffered a blow to the back of his head and may have been the victim of an assassination. Robert Connolly of the University of Liverpool conducted the original studies on Tutankhamun's X-rays.
One of the earliest suggestions was that the back of the head may have shown some injury or perhaps some thinning of the bone, suggesting a blow to the back of the head. You cannot see anything on this X-ray. There is no evidence, no real suggestion of a blow to the back of the head. Other people have suggested there may be some injury here around the ear. That is a perfectly normal appearance for the skull. The only fragment of bone which is out of place is there. And we know exactly where that came from. That came from a plate of bone here, which separates the nose from the brain cavity. And during mummification, when they removed the brain, this was done by fracturing this bone through the nose and removing the brain through the hole. And that fragment of bone there really should be there. And that is the only abnormality. There is absolutely no evidence on this X-ray suggesting cause of death.
But in the case of Artemidorus, evidence of violence is more obvious. While looking at the CAT scans, Joyce Feiler and Gus Alusi noticed several cracks radiating from what appears to be a wound on the back of his skull.
You can see quite clearly some nice